Hi, my name is Aiden, and I'm the host of Leaguecast podcast, the longest running League of Legends podcast. New Tahm Kench is as strong as he's ever been. I've been hovering mid Diamond 1 on multiple accounts playing him, and I want to teach you all how to climb with him post rework. Why should you play Tahm Kench? Tahm Kench after his mini rework is one of the strongest solo laners in the game. His rework W and ultimate give him even more room to dominate solo queue games. He can still be played as a support, but this guide will be primarily focusing on Tahm Kench in the top lane. Let's take a look at Tahm Kench's abilities. Tahm Kench has a 3-stack passive which allows him to change how his Q and R function. This passive also gives him magic damage on hit based on his bonus maximum health. This amounts to 10-ish magic damage at level 1, scaling up to 115-ish late game depending on your build. This passive also procs on his Q, allowing for insane damage on your primary ability. His Q is a quick linear skill shot that applies a small slow for 1.5 seconds. This is your bread and butter ability as it allows you to get in on enemies and stick to them. This ability not only applies a stack when hitting an enemy, but it turns into a stun if it hits an enemy that already has 3 passive stacks on them. The ability does a ton of damage at higher ranks due to its passive damage integration. This ability also weirdly scales with character size now, but we'll get into that later. Tahm's new W changes the way that the champion functions. Rather than looking for game-changing consumes on allies, the ability is now a short-ranged AoE knockup. This ability is pretty hard to hit in vision due to its front-loaded channel time, but using this ability from fog or bushes can lead to easy engages on enemies. The ability is not only useful for its engage, but it also gives Tahm great mobility and evasiveness while in lane or during roams. Remember that your W locks you out of abilities and for a short duration after. Make sure to use E accordingly so you're not locked out of it. Oh, I hate this character, oh my god. You can also extend the range of W by placing it on walls. This also removes the indicator, but be aware as it also removes the knockup. I'll have a section on important W locations at the end of the video. Tahm Kench's E is called Thick Skin. He stores a percentage of damage taken as Grey Health. This Grey Health is converted back into a heal based on champion level. This ability can be activated to turn current Grey Health into a 2.5 second shield. You can use this ability as a second health bar when being focused, a way to avoid chip damage in lane, or as a free regen tool throughout the game. It is important to use this ability to its maximum potential with its short 3-second cooldown. Try to shield accurately for the amount of damage coming your way. Shield too much and it will go wasted, shield too little and the enemies will burn right through it. Tahm Kench's ultimate Devour is a much stronger version of his original W. Tahm Kench can use this ability on allied champions freely to reposition them and spit them out with a large shield. Use this to save ally carries when possible. The R can also be used on enemies with 3 passive stacks on them, similar to his old W, but with a much more forgiving range. You'll see me take a step back before using R to abuse this sometimes. With the rework, you can now hold enemies in your stomach for 3 seconds and move with less of a self-slow. This allows you to drag enemies under tower to line them up for easy kills. This ability can also be used in conjunction with your Q to eat enemies with 3 stacks on them from range. This rarely happens and is more of a gimmick than anything, as your Q will be on cooldown when you go to spit them out, unless you have the needed ability haste to combo. The biggest gimmick mechanic with his ultimate is eating an ally then using your W to teleport them and yourself a short distance. I have yet to use this in a situation where it's good. Simply put, saving your R to use reactively is way better than using it proactively. As I mentioned, I believe Tahm is viable in top and support, as well as a counterpick mid into aggressive melee AD champs such as Yone, Yasuo, Zed, Talon, Qiyana, etc. In this guide, I will be talking about top lane Tahm Kench, but the information can be applied to all roles. Tahm has multiple summoner choices in the top lane. Personally, I go Ghost TP every game to best utilize my early game pressure. Teleport is a great tool in solo queue to neutralize ganks in bottom and mid, as well as a backup plan if you butcher your own lane. I used to go Flash every game as I thought it was necessary for securing solo kills, but have made the switch to Ghost and firmly believe it is needed for Tahm Kench. Kench is tanky enough that Ghost, W, and E gets you out of all ganks that Flash would. It's on a shorter cooldown and is insane in teamfights, where participating in kills increases the duration, allowing for entire fights of increased movement speed. Some Kench mains still opt for Flash, some opt for Ignite over TP for close matchups. Any of these combinations of TP, Flash, Ghost, and Ignite for Tahm Kench can work, and you'll see that all Tahm Kench mains are doing what they feel is best for their own playstyle. Runes for Tahm Kench are pretty straightforward with a couple minor choices. Most Tahm Kench mains take Resolve Primary, picking up Demolish and Second Wind, with a choice between Unflinching and Revitalize. Going Shield Bash is better than it used to be, but I still like the free gold that Demolish procs provide from turret plates. If you are in a lane where you can't get Demolish procs, then take Shield Bash, but don't default to it. Only default to that rune on champions who proc it as part of their normal trade pattern, like Shen and Camille. For the secondary tree, there is a choice between Inspiration and Precision. I take Inspiration with Approach Velocity and Magical Footwear. Approach Velocity is needed to get into range to trade, and Magical Footwear's movement speed is insane once you get it. In hard lanes, feel free to take Biscuit Delivery instead, but don't default to taking it. Taking Precision is fine in easy matchups, picking up Triumph and Legend Alacrity to give better trading patterns as well as the potential to clutch out close 2v1s with Triumph's heal. As for rune shards, pick up the attack speed in the first slot, the ability haste isn't awful either, adaptive force in the second slot, and then the lane specific resist in the third. You do have the option of going double resist, but your breakpoint for last hitting under tower comes a level or two later without the damage. Let's talk a bit about Tahm Kench's build. Starting items should almost always be Doran's Shield plus a health potion. There's potential for starting Corrupting Potion, but it is not something that I have tried much myself. Mythic choice for Tahm Kench is straightforward, with Frostfire Gauntlet being the correct choice whenever possible. Frostfire is the cheapest of the tank mythics, gives utility with its slow, and its mythic passive now gives you extra range due to your Q scaling with size. Building Sunfire is still an option and will give more wave clear with its better Immolate passive. It is important to note that both Sunfire and Frostfire burn enemies while they're in your stomach. Boot options for the most part will come down to plated steel caps or merc treads, depending on if you need to reduce auto attack damage or if you need to incorporate tenacity into your build. Other boot options include boots of swiftness as movement speed is your best stat. Berserker's Greaves are another option if you're not running Precision Tree and don't get any value out of picking either of the tank boots. Some Tahm Kenches have started to build Soloq shoes, but I'm not fully convinced on the item. Tahm Kench has a ton of magic damage in his kit, but it's hard to value the pen versus tank boot passive. The core build of Tahm Kench has changed a lot since my last guide. Many of his old items have been nerfed into the ground and new items have been introduced. Currently, before the item gets gutted, you should be building Anathema's Chains first into all non-tank matchups. Chains is one of the best items in the game right now, and Tahm Kench is the biggest abuser of it, as its raw health acts as damage for Tahm Kench's passive, and the item's passive nemesis gives pseudo-resistances against your lane opponent. Building this item first will allow you to win any lane matchup. Rush this item before Mythic until it's nerfed. After Chains, look to build into Frostfire boots and if needed, Bramble. The traditional tank path involves building Gargoyle's Stoneplate. Once this item is complete, you are almost unkillable while diving into the enemy backline by properly managing Q healing, E shielding, and Stoneplate active. Other armor items you should consider are Randuin's into auto attackers and crit heavy teams, finishing Thornmail into heavy healing teams. MR items to consider are Spirit Visage as it synergizes extremely well with your Q and your E healing, Wit's End when winning versus AP comps, and there's still room to build Force of Nature as a final capstone item into heavy AP comps. As for health items, you are already building Anathema's Chains, but you can also consider Warmogs into poke heavy comps. Warmogs is easier to proc due to its passive threshold being changed, but it is less needed as your Q can now heal you up from poke. Other items to consider picking up are Nashor's Tooth, which some Tahm Kench mains have been picking up to utilize Tahm Kench's great AP ratios on Q and W, as well as his great use of attack speed to proc passive. If you're already ahead in lane, you can also consider picking up Dark Seal, as Tahm's 70% Q ratio, 100% W ratio, 5% damage, and 100% shield ratio on R all make great use of Dark Seal's AP. This item is 123% gold efficient when it has 0 stacks, scaling up to 434% gold efficient at 10 stacks. It is harder to fit this item into your build now, as every back you can easily pick up ruby crystals or cloth armor, but if you can't fit this item into early game leads, it will help you push your advantage. Lastly, Knight's Vow is still an option to pick up late game if you are not the carry and your AD carry needs extra help in fights. I would only build this item in games where you're behind but already have your core items and your AD carry is your only win condition. Tahm Kench's ability sequence. There's not too much to say here. Max your Q every game, take ult at 6, 11, and 16. Typically you want to max your W second over your E, but you can do it the other way if you're in a hard matchup and you need the extra gray health and the regen. You can also take your W or your E level 2 depending on how the lane is playing out. If you're not going to have the ability to use your W on the enemy, there's no reason to take it level 2, so instead take E and level up W at level 3 or 4, putting the extra point in Q at level 3, as it increases the damage by 50 and decreases its cooldown and mana cost. Just care for level 3 jungle ganks if you do this, as you won't have access to your W to escape. Tahm Kench's early laning is weaker than his stat stick pre-rework state, but he's still very strong. Landing Qs, keeping stacks applied, and pressuring for Q stuns will give you heavy priority in many lanes. Look to abuse this strong early game to stack grass procs and look for solo kills. Champions that do not have movement abilities can easily be comboed with Q slow into W. Dipping in and out of lane bush's top is also strong, as the W cast time is front loaded, so threatening to cast it while hidden will give enemies little time to react. Ideally, the lane is played out by last hitting wave 1 and 2 while building your own wave, then crashing it by fast pushing wave 3 to get a good recall. Tahm Kench's current itemization allows for strong recalls at almost any point, as Mythic plus Chains relies on many small gold investments for components. When pushing the wave and pressuring under the enemy tower, look to use your W to teleport over the river wall to escape when ganked. After level 3, you can take most trades and heal up after bad ones with well-placed Qs. After level 6, your kill pressure is insane. Look for setups with R under turret for easy kills. When going for a dive, Tahm should tank as it's typically easier to manage your health in E-Shield. After level 6, the jungler can start the dive and Tahm Kench can use R to break tower aggro if needed. Being pushed in as Tahm isn't as bad, as your W is a great setup for ganks, as well as it being very easy to use your R to eat an enemy and drag them under your tower as a pseudo Skarnerald. This is a bread and butter kill combo, and you should always be looking to threaten to do it to an enemy. Mid game for Tahm Kench is where I find him to be at his strongest point in the game. I would define this point as sometime after you finish your Mythic plus Chains or another core item. At this point, the enemy top laner will find it hard to split push versus you, and your teamfights will be strong, as you not only have damage but survivability that is unmatched. Forcing objectives with this spike will lead your team to hopefully snowball into a win. In teamfights, look for large knockups, out of place carries, as well as look to defend your carries by peeling with QW and R. Late game, you become a split pusher with the main purpose of managing side waves. In matchups where you can still solo kill the enemy, you have free lane over the map, splitting wherever you want and holding TP to get to fights when they break out. In matchups where you can get solo killed by the enemy, you mostly act as a tool to minimize their side lane pressure. With chains, most matchups are manageable, and at the very worst, you can delay the enemy from getting to fights by stalling them in lane. Let's move on to how to use Tahm Kench's new ultimate. Using Tahm Kench's R properly in fights is important, as the ability can be easily wasted by eating an unneeded ally or enemy. When playing Tahm Kench support, you should almost always be using the ability to save an ally. When playing Tahm top, this becomes a larger decision that changes as the game goes on. During early laning, you should be using your Q to proc your stacks for the stun, as it allows you to get off 1 or 2 extra autos while they are stunned, allowing you to set up for your next Q or R. If you do not have your Q up while they have stacks on them, you can use your R and eat them, and wait for your cooldowns. It is important to note that their cooldowns are also timing down while inside of you. Your R should be used to consume these stacks when the enemy is about to get out of the fight, or when it's beneficial to eat them over stunning them. Examples of this include when you're about to be stunned, you should eat the enemy as they can't escape, and their CC is now practically applied to themselves. If the enemy has any buff or lasting ability, you can also eat them and wait it out. Examples of this are Nasus, Renekton, Riven, and Alawi, as all their ults are being wasted as they are CC'd inside of you. Minor tactics exist with this ability, such as timing your R when Jace uses his E, or Poppy uses her ult, to knock you back with them inside of you. Some champs hard counter your R, such as Gangplank and Olaf with their cleanses, and healing over time champions such as Swain, Mundo, and Vladimir, as your R can actually slow down your DPS enough that they heal while inside of you. Your only DPS while using your R is the burn from your mythic passive and the max % HP damage. In 2v2 fights, eating the enemy that does the most damage is usually the correct play, but sometimes can save them if your ally is planning to burst them. Identifying when to use your R and when to use your Q to consume the stacks can make the difference in fights. One tactic I try to use when in 2v2s is I eat the enemy and spam ping where I'm going to spit them out. This allows your ally to throw a skill shot, or at the very least be prepared for them to be spat out. This typically leads to easy CC chains, as you can spit them into abilities like Morgana Q, Rek'Sai Knockup, Nautilus Hook, etc. If you have good communication with your teammate, you can eat your ally and spit them out with a huge shield, which can easily turn a fight. Late game, your use of R should typically transition into being an ally saving ability primarily used on carries and fights. The damage on R does not scale enough into the late game, and using it on enemies is only good as a preventative measure to make the fight a 4v4 for a short while. Since the duration of eating enemies has gone up to 3 seconds and the movement penalty has been greatly reduced, you can eat an enemy and hold them in your stomach to deny damage. Using your ultimate to deny game-changing abilities such as Skarner ult and Malzahar ult is still a great way to turn a fight. Let's talk about support Tahm Kench. I only play support Tahm Kench when I'm autofilled, but I don't think he's as weak as others say he is. If you're playing an aggressive bot lane, feel free to sit in the bushes and look for cheesy W knockups. Otherwise, use Q to poke and do your best to peel for your AD carry. Using your R on enemies is fine for support Kench in lane, as you can make it a 2v1 for 3 seconds. It's actually insane if you can throw them under the turret, but for the most part, the ability should be used to save your ally carry and reposition them. For support Kench, I think it's best to run Guardian Keystone. I think there's some merit to running Hail of Blades in aggressive lanes to easily proc your 3 stacks, but Guardian is overall a better Keystone. Build Locket as your mythic and protect your carries as much as possible. You can go Frostfire or Sunfire as your mythic, but this is mostly because the champion is overloaded and unkillable late game. I personally think he's still a really good support, but you have to be much smarter about using your W and E, as you can't brain dead tank stuff for as long. Let's talk about Jungle Kench. Jungle Kench is dead. What about Tahm Kench in the mid lane? I think Kench mid is still sick into melee characters, especially AD assassins. Build and runes are the same for mid, with the exception that I take flash instead of ghost mid, as you get punished way too hard for not having flash mid. I also think Tahm Kench as a carry bottom is pretty good. Not much to say here as my experience is super limited, but I think it's kind of sleeper OP. You need to have the right comp for it by having sustained AD damage in top, jungle, or mid, but he's good into bot, traditional AD carry support lanes. Play him with engaged champs like Leona or Nautilus and brawl them to death, play him with an enchanter and survive for days in fights, or play him with a mage support and frontline for them and engages. Try it sometime, it's surprisingly good. Let's talk about his mechanics, power spikes, and some extra stuff. Q is an interesting ability as it is a linear skill shot with the cast animation. This cast animation is shortened when you hit an enemy champion. If you miss with your Q, you are locked out of all inputs until the entire animation finishes, compared to hitting a melee ranged Q where the animation is less than half the duration. E is an ability that gets its power from proper timing. E shield lasts 2.5 seconds, so you want to time your shield to absorb the amount of damage that you're going to take in the next 2.5 seconds. Shield for too much and your shield will be partially wasted, shield too early and the enemy will burst right through it to your health bar. Also, make sure to use your E after an auto attack as the E animation will cancel auto attacks. You can use your ultimate on nothing to proc Windsoul movement speed buff. This seems to be a bug, potentially even an exploit despite how small it is. You can eat and spit both enemies and allies over walls with your ultimate. You can animation cancel your ultimate by using your Q as your ultimate times out. This allows for a guaranteed Q, auto attack, and grasp proc applying 2 stacks immediately. I would recommend going into practice tool to work on the timing. Here's a short compilation of important W locations. Some of these are dependent on your W level, so make sure to practice these in custom lobbies. Some of these W locations are one way only. This is also important to remember so you don't waste it. I originally had a section in the guide on Tahm Kench bugs, but with the rework and the patches since then, all the major bugs have been fixed, including the infamous ultimate indicator bug. I'm not going to go through all the matchups, but I did an entire video where I made a tier list of Tahm Kench's top lane matchups and explained why the champs are hard or easy for Tahm. Check it out here. A tier list like this will constantly change with buffs and nerfs to champions and items, so apply the general concepts as to why matchups are strong or weak, rather than taking them as they are shown. If you want a written version of this, please refer to Norm Whatley's matchup guide, linked below, as we have similar opinions on a lot of matchups. Since my last guide, Tahm Kench has gotten a new skin. Not much has changed from my last guide, but here's my ranking of Tahm Kench's best skins. Chef Kench fucking slaps. The new W stack animation, the run animation with his little knives when you apply 3 stacks, the new ultimate animation, a 6 splash art, and when he recalls he sips his soup, what more could you ask in a skin? Easy 10 out of 10. Coin Ripper is a fantastic skin. Best Tahm Kench splash art in the game, a new stack animation, an awesome recall, the best ultimate animation and sound out of all the skins, and 6 wonderful chromas that all look great in game. 9.5 out of 10. Base Tahm Kench. He's a well-dressed catfish boy and it fits his champion design perfectly. The splash art is awesome, 8.5 out of 10. Earth Kench isn't a bad skin, but there's nothing to write hum about. It reuses assets from Chef Kench and has an ugly model. It also shares a splash art with a bunch of other ugly characters. The bib and crown are the only things that save this skin, 5 out of 10. Arcana Tahm Kench. I love this splash art. I was really hoping that Tom's new skin would be a mob boss type skin, but this skin blew away all my expectations. The sound design is great, the new stacks look amazing but are kinda hard to read in game, and the chromas are also unique that I switch them up every game. This skin is an easy 9 out of 10. Thank you for checking out my Tahm Kench guide. If you're interested in any other content by me, I host a weekly League of Legends podcast called Leaguecast, which you can find on any podcast app. I also stream on Twitch, primarily playing Tahm Kench and producing League of Legends content. You can check that out at twitch.tv/LeaguecastFrost. Be sure to like the video and subscribe. Thank you very much.